Once upon a time the hall was glowing with golden light. Strings of roses were wrapped around every column, chandeliers sparkled as though they had captured 100 stars, and guests filled the pews with excited whispers. 1,000 details were in motion: the clinking of glasses, the rustle of dresses, the low hum of anticipation, but Emma stood behind the velvet curtain, her heart beating far louder than the music. It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Every girl grows up imagining the moment, walking down the aisle in a white gown, the entire room turning to watch, and at the end of that aisle, the man she loves waiting with tears in his eyes. For Emma, that man was Daniel, or at least, she thought he was. She adjusted her veil nervously and clutched her bouquet so tightly that a few petals bent. Her bridesmaids fussed around her, whispering encouragement. "You look stunning," one said. "He's going to fall apart when he sees you," another added. Emma smiled faintly, though her chest felt heavy, almost suffocated. Something inside her whispered that she needed air. Just a moment to breathe. Just 1 minute, she murmured to her bridesmaids, slipping past them. They nodded, thinking she was just nervous. Everyone assumed butterflies. No one knew Emma's nerves often came with instincts, a little voice that tugged her when something wasn't right. She followed that voice now, lifting the edge of her gown as she walked quickly through the back corridor that led to the garden. The garden was quiet compared to the buzz inside. The faint smell of jasmine and roses hung in the cool air. Emma closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, trying to steady herself. The wedding was minutes away. She told herself it was natural to feel overwhelmed. She was about to start a new life. But just as she began to calm, a sound caught her attention. A voice. A familiar voice. She froze, listening more carefully. Daniel's voice drifted from just beyond the hedges, sharp, hurried, and nothing like the romantic tone he always used with her. "Relax," he was saying, his words slicing the air. "Everything's under control. Once the ceremony is done, her family's company is practically mine. She has no clue. She thinks I'm head over heels. By next month, the contracts will be signed, and we'll be swimming in money." Emma's fingers stiffened around the bouquet until thorns from the roses pricked her skin. Blood rushed to her ears, and her stomach dropped so suddenly it was as though the ground itself had given way beneath her feet. He couldn't have said what she just heard. Not Daniel. Not the man who had looked into her eyes 100 times and sworn he loved her. Not the man who held her hand through late-night talks about dreams and futures. But the words hung in the air, cruel, undeniable. On the other end of the line, a faint chuckle responded. A man's voice, though Emma couldn't make out the words. Daniel laughed in return, a laugh that no longer sounded like the man she thought she knew. It was greedy, mocking, the sound of someone already tasting victory. "She's too blinded by love to notice," Daniel continued. "You'll get your cut. Don't worry. I'm marrying her for both of us. It's the easiest deal I've ever made." Emma's hand shook so violently that the bouquet nearly slipped from her grasp. She stumbled backward, pressing herself against the garden wall, as though hiding from the truth she had just discovered. Her eyes burned with tears, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. She bit her lip so hard she tasted blood. Her first instinct was to run. To tear off the veil, rip the dress, and disappear before anyone could find her. But as quickly as that thought came, another replaced it, stronger, steadier. No, she would not give Daniel the satisfaction of seeing her broken. He wanted a pawn. He wanted a naive little bride who would smile at the altar, give him her family's legacy, and never know the truth. But he had underestimated her. Emma straightened her back slowly, her breath unsteady but growing sharper with every second. She peeked around the hedge just once, enough to see him standing there with the phone pressed to his ear. His suit was perfect, his hair combed immaculately, his posture arrogant. The same man who, just an hour ago, had kissed her cheek and told her he couldn't wait to spend forever with her. Her heart cracked, but the anger pushing through it was fiercer than the pain. How long had he been lying? Was it all of it? The late-night walks, the laughter in her kitchen, the tender words whispered when he thought she was asleep, or had there been a moment, any moment, when his affection was real? She searched her memory for proof, but the whispers she had just heard drowned everything else out. She pressed a trembling hand to her stomach, feeling like she might vomit, then whispered to herself in a voice so soft it was almost a vow, "You picked the wrong bride to betray, Daniel." Daniel's voice lowered as he ended the call, his smile smug, as if he had already won. He adjusted his tie, glanced at his reflection in the glass doors of the hall, and walked back inside, not once suspecting the storm brewing only steps away. Emma stayed frozen in the shadows, her breath uneven, until the garden was silent again. She could still hear the faint echo of the priest's voice inside, announcing that the ceremony would begin soon. Guests were settling, music was playing, and soon, someone would come looking for her. She looked down at her bouquet. Tiny drops of blood dotted her palm where the thorns had pricked her, staining the white roses faintly red. It felt symbolic, innocence tainted, purity wounded. But her grip tightened around the stems instead of letting go. She would not walk away from this. She would not let Daniel win so easily. Her father's face flashed in her mind, his pride, his trust in her choice. Her mother's tears of joy earlier that morning. Her younger sister's giggle when she had whispered, "You're the prettiest bride I've ever seen." All those people were inside, celebrating a love that didn't exist. If she fled, the lie would still stand. Daniel would twist the story, paint himself as the victim, and perhaps still find a way to worm into their lives. No, she had to face him. But not as the bride he thought she was. The fire in her chest burned brighter now, fed by betrayal but fueled by resolve. She would walk down that aisle. She would look him in the eye. And she would make sure that when the truth came out, it shattered him in front of everyone he hoped to impress. She turned back toward the hall, her steps slower, heavier, but steadier with each one. She didn't wipe her tears, she let them dry on their own, leaving faint streaks on her face that her bridesmaids would mistake for nerves. Her veil hid her expression, but her eyes were no longer soft with love. They were sharp, cold, and waiting. Inside, the orchestra struck a cheerful chord, announcing her entrance. Guests turned expectantly, eager to see the radiant bride. Emma paused for a breath at the threshold, her father waiting to take her arm. He looked at her with warmth and pride, not noticing the storm just beneath her surface. She forced a smile and let him guide her forward. Every step echoed like thunder in her mind. The aisle stretched before her, lined with flowers and smiling faces. At the far end, Daniel waited, his grin wide, his eyes filled with false adoration. To everyone else, he looked like the perfect groom. To Emma, he looked like the snake that had tried to coil itself around her life. Her hands tightened on the bouquet again, but this time, not out of fear. Out of power, out of purpose. She whispered to herself one last time, almost inaudible, "This wedding will end, Daniel. But not the way you think." And with that vow burning in her chest, Emma walked toward the altar, her heart no longer fragile, but armed. The hall fell into a heavy hush as Emma reached the altar. The music softened, the guests' chatter quieted, and every pair of eyes seemed to glow with admiration for the bride in white. To them, this was a moment of romance, the promise of a lifetime. But inside Emma's chest, every beat of her heart was a war drum. She felt as though she was walking on a tightrope stretched above fire, each step pulling her closer to a confrontation that would either break her or set her free. Daniel's smile was broad and dazzling, but she saw through it now. His eyes lingered on her in a way that once made her weak with love but now felt hollow, like the look of a man admiring a trophy he was moments away from claiming. He took her hand when she reached him, and his grip was firm, almost triumphant. He whispered softly, so only she could hear, "You look perfect. Just perfect." Emma didn't flinch. She forced herself to meet his gaze, her lips curving into a practiced smile. If he saw the storm in her, he might try to hide his guilt, spin his lies before she had the chance to expose him. No, she wanted him confident. She wanted him certain he had won. Because when the truth unraveled, it would hit him harder than any blow. The priest cleared his throat, his voice rising to fill the space. He spoke of love, of unity, of trust, of vows meant to bind two souls together. Emma listened, each word cutting her like a blade because she knew how cruelly Daniel had mocked them in his secret call. She glanced once at her parents seated in the front row, her mother clutching tissues, already misty-eyed, her father upright and dignified, proud of the moment. Her sister beamed, whispering something to the bridesmaid beside her. None of them had the faintest clue that the love they celebrated was rotten. Emma's chest ached, but she held her ground. The priest eventually turned to Daniel. "Do you take this woman to be your lawful wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, until death do you part?" Daniel's voice rang strong, smooth, confident. "I do." The room erupted with soft sighs of joy, a few quiet claps. Emma stared at him as he said the words, marveling at the performance. He sounded so convincing, so devoted, so real. If she hadn't overheard him, she would have believed it. That thought chilled her more than anything else, how close she had come to a life built on lies. Then the priest turned to her. "Do you, Emma, take this man to be your lawful husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, until death do you part?" The hall stilled again. A silence like no other, heavy and expectant, filled the air. Every eye turned to her. Daniel's fingers tightened around her hand, eager, impatient for the words he wanted to hear. Emma inhaled deeply. She could feel her pulse in her ears, the weight of truth pressing against her chest. Her lips parted, and instead of a vow, her voice carried something else entirely. "Before I answer," she said softly but firmly, her voice cutting through the silence, "there's something you all deserve to know." The guests stirred. Confusion rippled across the room. The bridesmaids exchanged glances, unsure if this was part of some dramatic gesture. Daniel's smile wavered, just slightly, his eyes narrowing. Emma looked out over the crowd, her gaze sweeping across the faces of family, friends, and strangers who had gathered to celebrate. She wanted them all to hear. She wanted the truth to echo against the walls so there could be no denial. "I thought today was about love," Emma continued, her tone steady though her chest trembled with the weight of her words. About two people making a promise they mean with their whole heart. But what you don't know, what I didn't know, until minutes ago, is that love is not what brought us here. Murmurs began to rise. Guests leaned closer, whispering, confusion growing with every second. Emma turned her eyes back to Daniel, whose face had paled. His lips twitched as if he wanted to interrupt, but she lifted her free hand, silencing him with a single motion. This man, she said, her voice sharper now, each word deliberate, is not standing here because he loves me. He is standing here because he loves what my family owns. Our company, our name, our wealth. I heard him, outside this very hall, just minutes ago. He told someone over the phone that marrying me was nothing more than a deal. That once I signed the papers, everything we built as a family would belong to him. He said I was too blinded by love to see the truth. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, sharp intakes of breath filled the silence her words left behind. Her mother's hand flew to her mouth, her father's face turned stone hard, her sister's eyes widened with shock. Some guests shook their heads in disbelief, others leaned forward eagerly, like spectators at a play that had taken a sudden, dark turn. Daniel's mask cracked. His smile vanished, his jaw tightening as his grip on her hand turned almost painful. Emma, he hissed under his breath, trying to keep his voice low, what are you doing? This isn't the time. Emma pulled her hand from his, stepping back so the veil of white fabric separated them. Her voice grew louder, filled with a strength she hadn't realized she possessed. No, Daniel, this is exactly the time. You plan to humiliate me with lies. Instead, I will humiliate you with truth. The whispers surged louder. The priest stammered, unsure of what to do, his script useless in the storm that had erupted. Daniel turned toward the crowd, his hands raised in false innocence. This is nonsense, he said, his voice strained but still trying for charm. She's nervous. Every bride gets nervous. She must have misheard something. Emma cut him off, her tone like a blade. Do not dare to call me a liar. I heard every word. You told someone that marrying me was the easiest deal you've ever made. That once my family's business was in your hands, you and your partner would split the profit. Gasps rippled again, sharper this time. Daniel's eyes darted nervously across the crowd, trying to gauge who believed him and who didn't. Sweat beaded at his temple. His arrogance was slipping. Emma lifted her chin higher, her veil catching the light like a crown. You thought I would walk down this aisle blind, smiling, giving you everything. But I refused to say vows to a man who planned to betray me before the ink was even dry. The hall was alive with noise now. Some guests murmured angrily, others shook their heads in disgust. A few stood, glaring at Daniel as if they had known something was wrong all along. Emma's father rose from his seat, his expression thunderous. Her mother sobbed quietly, heartbroken but proud. Daniel, cornered, tried one last time. He reached for Emma, his voice louder now, desperate. Emma, think about what you're saying. You'll regret this. You're ruining everything. Emma stepped back, her hand clutching the bouquet like a shield. Her voice rang clear, silencing the chaos for a moment. No, Daniel, you ruined everything the moment you decided greed was more valuable than love. Her words hung in the air like a final strike. For a heartbeat, the hall was silent, everyone staring, waiting for what would happen next. Emma stood tall, her gown flowing around her, her eyes unyielding. Daniel, once so confident, looked smaller than he ever had, exposed under the weight of truth. And as the silence stretched, Emma knew this was no longer just about her. It was about Bride Overhears Groom's shocking betrayal, returns to wedding with ultimate revenge #folktales story person in that room who had ever been deceived, who had ever trusted someone unworthy, who had ever been made to feel like a fool. She had spoken not just for herself, but for all of them. The church was no longer the peaceful place it had been just moments before. It throbbed with whispers, gasps, and shocked exclamations. The very air seemed heavier, charged with the tension of a storm that had broken loose inside its walls. Guests looked at one another, faces tight with disbelief, some shaking their heads, others leaning forward, eager for more. And in the center of it all, Emma stood, veil catching the glow of the chandeliers, her figure both delicate and unbreakable, like a blade wrapped in silk. Daniel, red-faced and trembling with fury, tried to steady himself. His hands clenched and unclenched, his polished confidence unraveling thread by thread. He had walked into this day imagining himself victorious, the golden groom admired by all, claiming his prize. Now, under the weight of Emma's truth, he looked more like a thief caught with stolen treasure spilling from his pockets. Emma's father rose first, his chair scraping against the polished floor. His presence alone silenced some of the murmurs. He was a man of power, respected in the community, and when he fixed Daniel with that hard, steely stare, the room seemed to lean in his direction. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice low but resonant, each word striking with the weight of a gavel. Daniel opened his mouth, stammering, "Sir, I would never." Emma misunderstood. But Emma cut in before he could weave another lie. Her voice was calm, steady, and commanding, echoing through the vaulted ceiling. "Don't insult me further by denying it, Daniel. I heard you with my own ears. You said marrying me was the easiest deal you'd ever make. That once the papers were signed, my family's company would be yours. Do you dare stand here, in front of my father, my mother, my sister, and God himself, and lie again?" The guests shifted, waiting. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel's eyes darted nervously from face to face. He could feel their judgment pressing down on him, stripping away the carefully curated image he had spent years building. Sweat trickled down the back of his neck. When he finally spoke, his voice was sharp, defensive, no longer smooth and charming. "So what if I did?" he snapped. "Do you think anyone here would turn down what I was offered? A lifetime of wealth, security, power. You should thank me, Emma. I was going to make you part of something greater than your little fairy tale." Gasps rose again. His words, instead of saving him, cut deeper into his own downfall. He didn't realize it, but he had confessed, exposing himself fully. Emma's father's face turned crimson, her mother sobbed harder, and her sister glared with tears in her eyes. The guests murmured with disgust, some rising to their feet, some already shaking their heads at the ruined groom. Emma did not cry. She did not flinch. Instead, she felt a strange stillness wash over her, a clarity as pure as glass. The man she had once loved was gone. No, he had never existed. He was a mask, a shadow. And now, in front of everyone, that mask had fallen. She lifted her bouquet slowly, staring at the flowers now slightly wilted from her grip. Then, with graceful defiance, she turned and hurled it, not gently tossed, but thrown with strength, directly toward her sister. The younger girl caught it, wide-eyed, clutching the roses to her chest. The crowd gasped, then erupted in scattered applause, some mistaking it for symbolic theater, others realizing the deeper truth. Emma had just passed on the role of bride, not in defeat, but in power. She had chosen her own freedom. Emma removed her veil next, pulling it from her hair and letting it drift to the floor like a discarded shroud. She shook her head free, her face fully visible now, no longer the nervous bride, but a woman standing tall in her own strength. Her eyes glowed with determination as she turned to Daniel one last time. "You wanted to use me," she said, her voice ringing clear. "You thought I was weak, blinded, easy to deceive. But you forgot one thing. When you play with a woman's heart, you awaken her fire. And my fire will burn every lie you tried to build." Daniel lunged toward her, desperate, his hand outstretched as if he could grab her and pull her back into his control. But before he could reach her, her father and brothers stepped between them, iron walls of protection. Daniel stopped short, his eyes wide as he realized he was outnumbered, outmatched, and utterly exposed. "This wedding," Emma's father thundered, his voice echoing like judgment itself, "is over." The priest, flustered and pale, nodded in agreement, closing the book of vows in his hands. The organist hesitated, unsure whether to play or wait, until silence reclaimed the hall. All eyes returned to Emma. She took one last breath, letting the moment sink into her bones. This was supposed to be her wedding day, the start of a new chapter. Instead, it was her reckoning, her liberation. She wasn't walking away broken, she was walking away free. She turned to the crowd, her voice softer now but carrying even more power. "I came here expecting to be a bride. But instead, I stand before you as a woman who refuses betrayal. I will not chain myself to lies. This is not the end of my story, it's only the beginning." The room erupted in applause. Not polite clapping, but thunderous, heartfelt applause that rolled like waves against the walls. Guests stood to their feet, some cheering, others crying, all of them swept up in the courage they had just witnessed. Emma's mother clutched her hands to her heart, proud through her tears. Her sister smiled brightly, clutching the bouquet as though it carried more weight now than any jewel. Her father placed a protective arm around her shoulders, a silent vow of support. Daniel, humiliated, tried to shout above the noise. "You'll regret this. All of you, you'll regret crossing me." But his words fell flat, swallowed by the applause, ignored like the whining of a child who had lost his toy. He looked around desperately, but where once he saw admiration, now he saw disgust, disdain, and pity. No one came to his defense. No one believed in him anymore. His empire of lies had collapsed in a single day. Emma stepped down from the altar, her gown sweeping behind her like a wave of white fire. She walked with steady grace through the crowd, every step accompanied by cheers. She no longer felt like a bride fleeing a ruined wedding, she felt like a queen reclaiming her throne. As she reached the doors of the church, the sunlight streamed in, bathing her in golden light. It felt like the universe itself was crowning her with a new beginning. She paused at the threshold, turning back just once to look at the scene she was leaving behind. Daniel stood alone at the altar, stripped of charm, stripped of victory, a hollow man surrounded by whispers. Emma smiled faintly, not with bitterness, but with quiet triumph. The groom thought he was clever, she whispered to herself. But in the end, the bride had the last word. She stepped outside, the fresh air filling her lungs, the warmth of freedom wrapping around her. Cars honked in the distance, children laughed nearby, the world went on, untouched by the drama inside those walls. And Emma realized she, too, would go on, stronger, wiser, and free. For her, the ultimate revenge wasn't anger or destruction. It was dignity. It was walking away with her head high, leaving Daniel to drown in the ruin of his own greed. And as the doors of the church closed behind her, Emma felt lighter than she had in years, as if her heart had finally been returned to her. The story of her wedding had ended, but her life, her true life, was only just beginning.